It was the fall of 1996 when Jason, a 28-year-old truck driver from small-town Missouri, found himself on a lonely stretch of road known as the Whispering Road. Despite his career that took him across long, desolate highways, Jason had never been a believer in ghost stories. The tales the locals told about the Whispering Road were just that, stories passed down from generation to generation, designed to frighten those who didn't know better. Jason had heard it all. The most common legend was about a woman in white who appeared late at night on that forsaken road, asking drivers for a ride, only to vanish moments after getting in. The legend went further. If you didn't pick her up, you were doomed to suffer the same fate as many others, disappearing without a trace, becoming another forgotten soul wandering the night. Jason had never given it much thought. He scoffed at the idea. Ghosts were nothing more than folklore, the kind of thing that might make a good story around a campfire but had no place in the real world. That was until the night everything changed. Jason had just finished his route and was on his way back to the terminal after dropping off a load in a neighboring town. He had taken the usual route, the one that skirted the edges of the Whispering Road. It was late, far past midnight, and the road was eerily empty. His headlights cut through the darkness, illuminating the never-ending stretch of asphalt that seemed to twist and turn endlessly through the woods. The trees loomed on either side like silent, watching sentinels. He reached a familiar curve, where the trees closed in tightly and the road seemed to narrow. That's when he saw her. At first, it was a figure standing just beyond the reach of the headlights. Jason had grown used to seeing figures in the distance, a hiker, someone out for a late-night stroll, or an animal crossing the road. But this was different. The figure stood completely still, its features obscured by the darkness. As Jason approached, he slowed the truck instinctively, unsure of what he was about to encounter. The figure emerged into full view as he got closer. It was a woman, tall and impossibly slender, dressed in an old-fashioned white dress. The fabric fluttered around her as though a breeze was moving through it, though the air was unnervingly still. Her long, dark hair hung loosely around her shoulders, almost as though it were wet. Jason didn't think twice. He slowed down as he approached her, rolling down the window. "Hey!" he called out. "Need a ride?" The woman didn't respond at first. She stood motionless, staring into the headlights of the truck, her expression unreadable. Jason felt a wave of unease wash over him. Something wasn't right. But then, slowly, the woman lifted her head and looked at him. Her eyes were hollow, empty, dark pits that seemed to swallow all the light around them. "Yes," she said softly, almost in a whisper. "Please, take me home." Jason hesitated. His heart began to race, but he dismissed it. She was just a woman, stranded on the side of the road. This wasn't the first time he'd picked someone up. Without giving it much thought, he unlocked the passenger door, feeling the cold air seep in. The woman climbed into the truck silently, the smell of damp earth and decay following her like an invisible cloud. Jason tried to shake off the strange feeling crawling up his spine as he shifted the truck into gear. As soon as the truck began moving, he felt the temperature inside the cab drop sharply. His breath came out in visible puffs, despite the fact that it was a warm evening outside. He glanced at the woman. Her face was as pale as the moonlight, her lips pressed into a thin, colorless line. She didn't seem to notice the chill that had settled in. She simply stared ahead, her eyes fixed on the road. Trying to shake off his growing discomfort, Jason attempted to make small talk. "Where are you headed?" The woman didn't answer. She didn't even acknowledge his question. Jason felt a prickle of fear run down his spine, but he continued to drive, trying to convince himself that he was being foolish. The woman finally spoke after what felt like an eternity. "Stop here," she said softly. Jason pulled over to the side of the road, his hands trembling as he gripped the wheel. He had no idea why he was so nervous, but the feeling of dread that filled the cab of the truck was almost overwhelming. As soon as he stopped, the woman opened the door without a word and stepped out. Before Jason could say anything, she vanished into the night. Jason disappearing into the woods like a shadow. His mind raced. He didn't understand what had just happened. The next day, Jason went into town to grab some coffee and shake off the lingering unease. He made his way to a local diner, where a couple of truckers sat hunched over their mugs, talking in low voices. He couldn't help but overhear snippets of their conversation as he sat down at the counter. "You hear that, Jim?" one of the truckers said to his companion. Another one of them disappeared on Whispering Road. Jason froze. "What do you mean disappeared?" he asked, trying to sound casual, though his heart was hammering in his chest. The other trucker looked at him with wide eyes, lowering his voice as if to share a great secret. "People talk about it all the time. The woman in white. You see her, and if you don't pick her up, you're as good as gone. Happens every year like clockwork." Jason's blood ran cold. The woman, the road. He knew exactly what they were talking about. It was the same legend that every local had heard growing up. The woman in white who appeared on the Whispering Road asking for a ride. If you didn't stop, if you didn't help her, you were doomed to vanish like so many others. Jason tried to laugh it off, but the words stuck in his throat. He could still picture the woman's hollow eyes, the chill in the air that had seeped into his bones. Had he been foolish? Had he unknowingly put himself in danger by picking her up? Later that night, Jason couldn't sleep. He tossed and turned in his bed, haunted by the memory of the woman's face. He tried to convince himself it was all just a coincidence, that he was overreacting. But the feeling of dread lingered. The images of the hollow-eyed woman filled his mind, and he couldn't shake them. Jason knew he had to go back. He needed to know the truth. He needed to prove to himself that it was all just a story, nothing more than a creepy tale passed down by scared locals. He made up his mind he would drive down the Whispering Road again. That night, he got in his truck and took the same route, telling himself that it was all nonsense. The road was as desolate as ever, the trees forming dark silhouettes against the starless sky. As he neared the bend where he had seen the woman, his heart began to race again. There it was, the same stretch of road, the same ominous feeling in the air. Suddenly, the truck's headlights flickered. Jason cursed under his breath. He pulled the truck over, trying to restart the engine, but it wouldn't budge. The truck was dead. Cold sweat dripped down his forehead as he looked around, the silence pressing in on him like a heavy weight. And then, from the corner of his eye, he saw her. The woman in white was standing at the side of the road, just as she had been the night he picked her up. Jason's heart skipped a beat, and before he could even process what was happening, the woman began to move toward him. Her head was tilted slightly, and her empty eyes locked onto his. "Help me," she whispered. Jason couldn't breathe. His mind screamed at him to get out of there, but his body refused to obey. The woman came closer, her feet not seeming to touch the ground. She walked right up to the driver's side window and leaned in, her face so close now that he could feel her icy breath against his skin. "You didn't stop for me," she whispered. "Now you'll never leave." Suddenly, the truck roared to life. Jason's hands shook as he slammed his foot on the gas pedal, sending the truck speeding down the road. He didn't dare look in the rearview mirror. All he could think about was the woman's face, her hollow eyes searing into his soul. The truck continued to race down the road, but the eerie feeling never left. Every time he glanced at the rearview mirror, he expected to see her there, waiting for him. He never drove that road again. Weeks passed, and Jason tried to put the incident behind him. He moved to a different town, far away from the Whispering Road. But the memories wouldn't fade. He found himself waking up in a cold sweat in the middle of the night, haunted by the image of the woman in white. One day, he received a call from a friend in Missouri. The news was horrifying. Another trucker had disappeared on the Whispering Road. No one knew where he had gone, but the rumors spread quickly. Some said they had heard a truck on the road that night, but when they went to check, the truck was gone, just like all the others before. Jason's heart sank. He knew now without a doubt that the stories were true. The woman in white was real, and she had claimed him just as she had claimed so many others. The Whispering Road still exists today, though few dare to drive it at night. The legend lives on, a terrifying reminder that some stories are more than just tales, they are warnings. And if you ever find yourself on that desolate road, with the chill of the night creeping up your spine, remember, if you see her and you don't stop, you may never return. The woman in white is always waiting, and she's never far behind. The Whispering Road has claimed many souls, and it will claim many more. That's the truth. And it's a truth that will haunt you long after the headlights have disappeared into the night.